On the morning of May 1st, 2006, a woman arrived at her son's apartment in Hiratsuka City, Kanagawa Prefecture. Her son's name was Minehiro Yamauchi. He was 35 years old. But this wasn't a casual visit. The landlord had called her. His rent was overdue, and her son had not been responding. So she came bearing food, a bag filled with her son's favorite things. And what she found inside was beyond anything she could have prepared herself for. Minehiro's body was near the entrance to the apartment, where he had hanged himself. His body had been there for months, and decomposition had rendered him almost unrecognizable. But the true extent of the horror didn't fully reveal itself until the police were called, and they ventured further inside. Today, we are diving into one of the most bizarre and deeply unsettling cases in Japanese criminal history. One that rarely gets discussed outside of Japan, largely because credible English language sources are almost impossible to find. It's a story about 5 deaths that span decades, all connected to a single woman who sat at the center of an incredibly tangled web of relationships, lies, and tragedy. This is the Hiratsuka Five Bodies Case. When police began working their way through Minehiro's apartment, they found wrapped up on a futon the body of a 19-year-old woman named Rikako Okamoto, Minehiro's half-sister. Near Minehiro's body was a handwritten note. It read, "I want to die. I want to be with Rikako." At first glance, it looked like 2 self-inflicted deaths resulting from an incestuous relationship. The kind of tragic story that gets whispered about and quietly filed away. But as investigators dug deeper, that narrative started to fall apart because they found more bodies. 3 more, to be exact. 1 6-year-old boy and 2 infants, all tucked inside cardboard boxes in the same apartment. It was a scene that Japan's Asahi Shimbun newspaper would later describe as a house of horrors. 5 bodies, 1 apartment, and no clear explanations. Then the police discovered a note that went on to change the entire focus of the investigation. "I killed my daughter." To understand how 5 people ended up in that apartment, you have to go back to more than 20 years. It's December 28th, 1984, the dead of winter in Japan. The kind of cold where most people are curled up on thick futon or sitting at the kotetsu with a hot drink and a comforting snack. But 6-year-old Toshihide had other ideas. He wanted to play outside. So while his 32-year-old mother, Chizuko Okamoto, slipped out to run some errands, Toshihide headed out. When Chizuko returned home, her son was gone, and she searched everywhere. She called the police. She made television appeals, tears streaming down her face as she begged for help from the public. But nothing ever turned up. Toshihide had simply vanished. In around 2002, almost 20 years after his disappearance, Chizuko began telling people around her that Toshihide had been kidnapped by North Korea. Now, this is not as wild a claim as it might seem. North Korea did kidnap Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s and send them to North Korea. And it was international news in 2002. But years later, when the bones of a 6-year-old boy were among the remains of the 5 people found, investigators developed a very different theory. And all roads led back to one person, his mother. So who exactly is Toshihide's mother, Chizuko Okamoto? Chizuko was born on July 17, 1951, in Kitatsugaru District in the Aomori Prefecture of northern Japan. Her family was comfortable, well off by local standards. Her grandmother was an itako, a traditional spiritual medium from Hokkaido, believed to communicate with the dead. Unfortunately, when Chizuko was just 4 years old, her father died in a workplace accident. Her mother remarried, but that marriage ended in divorce in 1961, leaving the family fractured. There is not a great amount to report about her life until her late teens, in 1969. While waiting at Tsugaru railway station, she was approached by a marriage matchmaker, the kind of intermediary who was still commonly involved in facilitating formal introductions in Japan at the time. 1 year later, at 19, Chizuko married a man with the surname Okamoto in a ceremony on Okushiri Island off the southwestern coast of Hokkaido. Together, they had 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. By 1975, the marriage had broken down entirely. Living with her husband's family had become unbearable. One account says Chizuko tried to kill herself before fleeing, taking only her clothes and her second daughter. Another says she had begun an affair with a man she met at a snack bar where she worked part-time, and the two ran away together to Hakodate. Whichever story is accurate, both accounts agree on one thing. She left. Around 1977, Chizuko found her way to Hadano City in Kanagawa Prefecture, where she started working as a hostess at a cabaret bar. She was good at it, really good. Her soft features and strong presence made her stand out immediately, and she quickly became the #1 hostess at the establishment. Her charm was magnetic. She lit up every room she walked into, and that light caught the eye of a man named Toshio Yamauchi, the owner of a well-known soba restaurant in nearby Hiratsuka City. Toshio was so taken with her that he was willing to throw everything away for her, including his own family. Flirtatious encounters with Chizuko at the bar evolved into something more serious outside of it. And all the while, Toshio already had a wife and children at home. Chizuko knew this, Toshio knew this, but neither of them cared. Chizuko brought her second daughter from her previous marriage to live with Toshio and his family at the soba restaurant. Up until Chizuko came along, the family had had a decent life. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, thanks to the growing reputation of Toshio's restaurant. But Chizuko dismantled all of that success and all of that joy, piece by piece. Chizuko wasn't satisfied with simply inserting herself into the household. She wanted Toshio's family out of the house entirely. So Chizuko began abusing his wife and his second son, Mineiro, who was just an elementary school student at the time. The abuse took many forms. Mineiro was denied food. His mother was mistreated and manipulated. Chizuko would lie constantly, fabricating stories and framing the two of them for things they never did, all to stay in Toshio's favor. Eventually, the abuse became so unbearable that Toshio's wife packed up and left with her children, abandoning the house entirely. With the legitimate family out of the way, Chizuko settled in, but her presence turned out to be more of a curse than a blessing. She refused to work, lived off of Toshio's income, and meddled in the restaurant's operations until the business began to hemorrhage money. In 1978, Chizuko gave birth to her and Toshio's first child together, a boy named Toshihide. And as we already know, Toshihide disappeared in 1984. But he wouldn't be the only child of theirs to meet a tragic fate. In the years following Toshihide's apparent disappearance, Chizuko gave birth to 3 more children, 1 each in 1985, 1986, and 1987. But she never registered the births of the children born in 1985 and 1987. These were children who, as far as Japan's official records were concerned, simply never existed. Some sources say that these babies were stillborn, but there are no facts to back that up. When the babies' remains were discovered years later in boxes in that Hiratsuka apartment, autopsies did not conclusively show the cause of death. What exactly happened to those 2 children and why it happened is completely unknown. As for Toshio, we don't know the extent of his knowledge as to the fate of his children. What we do know is that Chizuko's presence in his life proved to be his ruin. He saw the restaurant continue to decline under Chizuko's influence. By 1993, Toshio had no choice but to sell it, and whatever money came from that sale did not last. Dealing with the loss of his livelihood and with his finances exhausted, Toshio turned to alcohol. and his health deteriorated steadily, and in 1997, Toshio Yamauchi died at the age of 56. So what happened to the other child, the one whose birth was registered? Her name was Rikako, and though Rikako was Toshio's biological daughter, she carried Chizuko's first husband's surname, Okamoto, in most records. Rikako was a source of brightness in Chizuko's life. She was warm, creative, and full of life. As a teen, she threw herself into the cosplay community, and she maintained an active presence online under the name Ruria Nishihara, keeping a blog and a profile on Mixi, Japan's most prominent social networking platform at the time. She was a writer at heart, warm, and easy to love. As for Minehiro, the son of Toshio that Chizuko had bullied so harshly, he had grown up and left home. And for some reason, he wanted to rebuild a relationship with Chizuko after his father's death. He was working as a security guard, though he quit that job in December 2005. What happened in those final months before the bodies were found remains largely unclear. And now it's worth pausing here to clarify something the early coverage of this case got wrong. The initial framing, a self-inflicted death following incest, implied a romantic relationship between Minehiro and Rikako. They were indeed related through their father. Minehiro was Toshio's son from his legitimate marriage. Rikako was Toshio's daughter with Chizuko. But whether Minehiro and Rikako were truly romantically involved was never established. What Minehiro's notes said was that he wanted to be with her in death. Whatever the truth of that relationship was, it died with him. In February 2005, Chizuko was evicted from her apartment, the place she had been living in with Rikako. The financial pressure had been building up for years. She had been borrowing money from neighbors since around 2003, and it had all finally caught up with her. The eviction sent her spiraling. She was so undone by the stress that she attempted to kill herself right in front of the bailiff. And in the chaos, she injured him. She was arrested on the spot. With nowhere to go, Chizuko and Rikako were taken in by Minehiro, moving into his apartment in Hiratsuka City. For a brief moment, it might have seemed like the beginning of something better. A small family, pieced back together, trying to move forward. It was anything but. On the morning of October 12, 2005, while Minehiro was still at work, Chizuko strangled her own daughter. Rikako fought back. She struggled, she screamed, but no one heard her, and somehow Chizuko overpowered her. Rikako was dead. But even after seeing what she had done, Chizuko did not grieve. She didn't panic. Instead, she called a taxi and took Minehiro out for a steak. At a steakhouse in the city, Chizuko was reportedly all smiles that evening. She ordered sirloin steak. She had draft beer. She was in such good spirits that she paid for the taxi driver's meal, left a 10,000 yen tip for the restaurant manager, the equivalent of roughly $64, and stayed for about 2 hours from 7 in the evening. The woman had just killed her daughter hours earlier. After Rikako's death, Chizuko wrapped her body in a futon blanket and packed it with dry ice to slow the decomposition. She and Minehiro continued living in that apartment, with Rikako's body lying there for months. This also explains something investigators discovered later. Minehiro had been making near-weekly trips to the same dry ice shop since the fall of 2005, always buying 2 or 3 blocks at a time. At the time, no one thought much of it. When friends and followers tried to reach Rikako through social media and her phone, they received a message saying she had been hospitalized. It wasn't Rikako responding. It was Chizuko, posing as her daughter, quietly managing the illusion that Rikako was still alive. In March 2006, Chizuko moved out of Minehiro's apartment. Shortly after, Minehiro hanged himself at the entrance of his own home. The 5th and final death in this sequence of tragedies. After the discovery of the 5 bodies, autopsies were performed. One set of remains was confirmed to belong to Toshihide, the boy who had supposedly gone missing on that cold December day in 1984. The other two were confirmed to be the unregistered children Chizuko had given birth to in 1985 and 1987. The remains had been identified, but the definitive cause of death could not be established in any of the three cases. And without a cause of death, there was no proof of foul play. The only charge that could be applied was that of abandoning a corpse. And if you think that this is unfair, it gets worse. The statute of limitations for this charge in Japan is only 3 years, meaning the deadline for punishment had lapsed well over a decade before the bodies were discovered. So whatever truly happened to those children, the legal system had no path left to address it. On May 3rd, 2006, Chizuko Okamoto was arrested on suspicion of Rikako's murder. As for Mineiro's death, it was officially ruled a self-inflicted death. There was no physical evidence placing Chizuko in the apartment before or after he died, and no witnesses. As for Chizuko's motive for killing Rikako, she has never revealed it. At trial, when prosecutors asked why she had killed her daughter, she refused to speak. What investigators and the public pieced together pointed to a deeply fractured relationship. Rikako's posts on Mixi reportedly contained expressions of frustration and resentment toward her mother, including some fairly pointed language. Many believe Chizuko discovered the posts and killed Rikako because of what she'd written, but that was never confirmed. At trial, Chizuko pleaded not guilty and attempted to pin the murder on Mineiro. It's also worth noting that the conviction came despite a significant evidentiary gap. There was no admissible physical evidence directly tying Chizuko to Rikako's death, and there were absolutely no witnesses. The court relied on circumstantial evidence and the logical assessment that Mineiro had no conceivable motive. On July 23, 2007, the Yokohama District Court sentenced her to 12 years in prison. She appealed, but the Tokyo High Court upheld the original sentence. The 12 years stood. There isn't much information about what happened to Chizuko after her release, but in the November 16, 2021 issue of the Japanese magazine Shukan Josei, one of her remaining relatives spoke publicly about her. That relative was Kuga Iijima, an AV actress and Chizuko's granddaughter through a daughter from her first marriage. According to her, Chizuko had been released from prison and was living on welfare, and that's where the trail ends. 5 bodies, 1 apartment, decades of secrets, a man who decided to take his own life, 2 children born and never registered, whose deaths were never explained, a 6-year-old who vanished and was found 20 years later in a cardboard box, a daughter strangled by her own mother, whose body was kept on a futon for months, and a woman who has never, not once, explained her actions. A 12-year sentence for a story this dark feels, to many, like it barely scratches the surface. Whether justice was truly served is a question many people are still asking. So, what do you think about this case? Let me know in the comments, and that is all for today. Thank you for watching.